Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of the Student Exemplar series. We look at your work, go through it in a video, talk about what makes it so great. Now today we're looking at a piece of work that was sent to me by Mrs. Hallahan. You might remember Mrs. Hallahan from the Ask the Examiner video, which if you haven't checked that out, go and check that out now. I'll link it in the description. And she sent me some work from a former tutee of hers. It's Louisa Carolan, a Year 11 student. Let's have a look at this comparison of the presentation of love in Porphyria's Lover and The Farmer's Bride. The Farmer's Bride being that long poem that so many of you struggle with. Let's have a look. Love can be both an abstract and tangible manifestation of emotion. Both Browning and Mew use a dramatic monologue to explore the effects a patriarchal society has on a relationship and the power that comes with it. So here's what I often talk about in this Student Exemplar series, a short, concise introduction which lays out the conceptualized response, the line of argument that the student is going to explore. The lack of love is illustrated through both of the poem's titles. In the title, it is revealed both of the women in the partnership are defined by their relationship. In The Farmer's Bride, the female's name is never actually revealed, and this reflects how women in the early 1900s were seen as powerless, merely a chattel of marriage. This highlights how women were seen as property and were essentially owned by their husbands. Although in Porphyria's Lover we know the woman's name, it is the only piece of information we learn about her. Although Porphyria seems powerless in the poem because she is a victim, she is not, because she drives Porphyria's lover into such strong emotion that he is able to commit murder. Porphyria is an illness that can lead to madness, so her power reflects how she leads him to madness. Unlike The Farmer's Bride, because it isn't the bride who feels particularly moved by the idea of marriage, it's the husband who is forcing the idea of it. The word lover implies that the relationship between Porphyria and her lover was illegitimate, which would have been unacceptable in the early 1800s, whereas bride means the relationship was legitimate, but because the marriage had not been consummated, it would not have been seen as complete in the eyes of the church. Well, there's a lot that's going on in this paragraph. One of the things I really like is the close word analysis of the titles. The list of the titles of the poems is included in the exam paper, so those titles are worthy of analysis, and having some ideas about how you might analyse the titles is going to give you a quotation that you can analyse in your answer, as we see here. Both The Farmer's Bride and Porphyria's Lover use nature to describe the feelings of anger and control. Throughout The Farmer's Bride, the farmer is constantly comparing the bride to an animal. The farmer describes her as being shy as a leveret. This metaphorical image gives connotations of weakness and infantilizes the bride, as leverets are small, cute animals. We see her as no different to the animals on his farm, and this reflects her low status as a woman in Edwardian times and highlights his feelings of ownership over her. He's further confused as to why he can't do what he wants with her young down. The adjective young further emphasises his dominance over the bride and how he sees her as less than him. The farmer focuses on her as a maid. The persona seems oblivious to the idea that the reader would pick up on that. A young girl might not be sexually interested in an old farmer. Similarly, there's a disconnect between the two lovers in Porphyria's Lover, where Browning uses personification of the wind as an embodiment of the persona's anger at Porphyria. The persona is sitting inside the cottage as the wind tore the elm tops down for spite, and this personification mirrors his actions further in the poem, as just like the wind, there is no reason behind his later violence. Also, the elm tops are significant as they are associated with the underworld in traditional Greek mythology and are often used for making coffins. Browning's deliberate use of these trees foreshadows Porphyria's death. The persona is just sitting inside in the dark and doesn't acknowledge his own anger towards Porphyria, and this total disconnect to his own feelings is presented later when no voice replied. Browning is using the passive voice and not owning his abusive behaviour in the relationship, and this deliberate silence or sending to Coventry tactic is indicative of the sort of relationship they have, and like the farmer in Farmer's Bride, he takes no ownership of his own behaviour and even believes it is the right thing to do. Well, again, so much that's good in this paragraph, clear comparison throughout the paragraph, a long paragraph. Some of the animalistic imagery that's explored is really good. The exploration of the passive voice, the Greek mythology link to elm tops. I didn't know about that. Really good. Of course, the analysis of "tore the elm tops down for spite," that's the quotation I use in my quotation song. If you haven't seen that, then check out the Revision Songs playlist. At the end of both poems, the reader is left intrigued and confused. In The Farmer's Bride, the farmer's frustrated with the stare betwixt us and the lack of physical relationship in the marriage. The distance between the farmer and the bride symbolises the bride's feelings of disdain and repulsion towards the farmer. There's both a physical and emotional distance between the two, which inhibits the farmer from being with her. Using the persona, Mew is exploring the idea of male privilege and how they are totally unaware of their own power and the unhappiness it brings their wives and women. Mew herself was never married and saw abusive relationships throughout her life, which made her weary of men. She had strong feminist ideas that can be clearly seen in this poem in the way she so obviously mocks the obliviousness of men's attitudes towards marriage and their ideas of ownership. Similarly to Porphyria's Lover, a feminist reading of this would say Browning uses the persona to demonstrate how the male patriarchy has incredible power over females and how this power is often abused. When the persona has murdered Porphyria, he says her eyes are without a stain. In Victorian times, they believed the murderer's profile would be stained on their eyes, and when the persona sees no stain, he's convinced he's done no wrong and therefore feels no guilt. The last line of the poem is God has not said a word, and this solidifies his justification in his action as God has not intervened. The Victorians were very religious, so murder would have been considered a deadly sin, so by the persona using God to justify his actions, it is a complete juxtaposition to the religious beliefs at that time. Okay, I love this paragraph. I love the really clever interweaving of contextual factors. Again, contextual factors I didn't know anything about. The idea of murderers' profiles being stained on their eyes. Really, really good. In both poems, we are exposed to two similar feminist ideas about the male patriarchy and how they hold unlawful power over the females in the poem. Both poems highlight the flaws of a male-dominant society and what a power imbalance can lead to. Porphyria's Lover shows the violent actions that can pertain in an abusive relationship, whereas The Farmer's Bride conveys the unhappiness of a lifelong, loveless marriage. What a fantastic conclusion to a fantastic answer. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like more student exemplars, I haven't put any up for ages, but this was so good. And do subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already.